Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I'm just wrapping up this pumpkin, so if you can give me 1 second. And there you go. Classy, isn't it? You know, I've been debating, and I think I've come to the conclusion that Halloween is the best holiday of the year. Just think about it. It's the perfect weather where it's not too hot or too cold. You can dress up as whatever you want and not feel criticized for it. There's no pressure in giving presents or cooking dinners. And best of all, it's an entire month full of horror. Every year I try to host some sort of movie screening for friends, but seeing how things have been lately, I'm only going to invite one person this year to watch the 1978 classic that scared babysitters nationwide. That's right, today we're renting out John Carpenter's Halloween. Which reminds me, I should probably invite this person.
Hey, what's good? Yeah, sure, I'm down. Just one question though. Crunchy or smooth peanut butter? Hello? Hello? Oh.
Halloween, easily one of the most revolutionary films in not only horror, but cinema history. It proved to studios that you can make a great horror film without a large budget. Even though the horror genre isn't held in high regard like dramas or comedies, it's because of horror that many directors get their foot in the door because of their ability to create a thrill ride on a cheap budget. When released, Halloween was a massive box office failure. No one went to go see it, and those who did called the film trashy. It wasn't until two film critics, Tom Allen and Roger Ebert, gave praising reviews to the film, leading to many more going to the theaters and being scared to death, to the point where audiences would warn the people in line about just how scary it was. After grossing over $50 million nationwide, the studios that had rejected Halloween in the first place started following the exact formula that was created by John Carpenter and co-writer Debra Hill. Holiday horror films like My Bloody Valentine, April's Fool's Day, New Year's Evil, and even famous slashers like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street were all clear ripoffs in one way or another. And before you go and leave some snarky comment, yes, before Halloween there were other influential horror films. By the mid-70s, the horror genre was starting to move on from gothic fantasy type scares into the horrors of real life. These films were like the appetizers, especially with Black Christmas, which is one of the first films to have a killer take down the main characters one by one, something we're so accustomed to today. However, Halloween was the massive hit that blew the slasher genre into the mainstream and made the 80s an amazing decade for horror. Sure, nowadays if you watch Halloween for the first time, you might not find it that special compared to recent films. Halloween created many of the cliches that we all relate to horror films, but you have to give credit where it's due. If it wasn't for this movie, the horror genre would not be where it is today. Personally, I think it's still a highly effective film, especially for the people who are barely getting into horror. While we wait for Dozer to arrive, why not take a look at the film's journey to see how a simple concept made it to its final picture. The year is 1953 and 5-year-old John Carpenter is on his way to the cinema with his parents where he saw the film that introduced his love for horror and the movies, It Came From Outer Space. A tame movie now, sure, but for a 5-year-old in 1953, it was a frightening experience. 23 years later, John Carpenter had just released his second feature film, Assault on Precinct 13, which was a reimagining of the Howard Hawks film Rio Bravo, a film that later inspired the name of one of the characters in Halloween. Irwin Yablans, Mustafa Akkad, and other key people started a production company called Compass International Pictures and were looking for low-budget films to finance. Yablans had seen Assault on Precinct 13 and was surprised Carpenter could pull that off, reportedly with $100,000. Knowing this recent UCLA graduate had talent, he reached out to Carpenter and pitched a film called The Babysitter Murders. The basic plot revolved around teenage babysitters being stalked by the boogeyman. Yablans specifically wanted them to be babysitters since it was a role that many teens could relate to. At this time, Carpenter was wanting to do westerns, but because that genre had already died out and he liked the idea enough, Carpenter agreed to write and direct it as long as he had complete creative control and got to put his name above the title. The reason he wanted his name above the title was purely to market himself as a director. And with those agreements, Carpenter told Yablans he could make the movie with $300,000. Akkad was worried because he had never heard of a movie being made for such a low amount, but Yablans had already dipped his toes in the independent film industry, so he knew Carpenter could make it work. They agreed to the budget, and so Carpenter hired on his girlfriend at the time, Debra Hill, to co-write and produce the film with him. Hill had met Carpenter on his set for Precinct 13, as she was the script supervisor and assistant editor. Carpenter and Hill tried to start the project, but were having difficulty finding a starting point. With October coming up, Yablans thought about having the film take place on Halloween and calling it, you guessed it, Halloween, something that hadn't been done before in history. Seriously, before this 1978 film, there had been absolutely no other film made with Halloween in the title. Yablans suggested this to Hill and Carpenter, kickstarting their creative fuel to start writing. Hill wrote the first draft of the script with all the girl characters and their dialogue, while Carpenter went out to direct the TV movie. Then Carpenter came back and rewrote it, with one of his biggest contributions being the Sam Loomis character chasing after the Shape and adding the themes of evil that Loomis frequently talks about. Which, by the way, Sam Loomis is the same name as Janet Leigh's boyfriend in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, a movie that had inspired Carpenter to make Halloween. The character of Sheriff Lee Brackett was named after the screenwriter of Rio Bravo, directed by one of Carpenter's favorite directors, Howard Hawks, who also directed that movie Tommy Doyle is watching. They also decided to have the film take place in Haddonfield, Illinois, since that's where Debra Hill grew up. With the film written, it was time to cast everyone. PJ Soles was cast as Linda after Carpenter saw her in Carrie and thought she was wonderful. For the role of Annie, Carpenter hired Nancy Kyes, or Nancy Loomis as she was referred to at the time. Nancy was hired after her small role in Assault on Precinct 13, plus it helped that at that time she was married to production designer Tommy Lee Wallace. Finally, for our main character, Laurie Strode, Carpenter initially wanted to hire Anne Lockhart, but supposedly Lockhart rejected the role. That's when Debra Hill recommended Jamie Lee Curtis, who had just started out in Hollywood and had done the 1977 TV series Operation Petticoat, which she had just been fired from. Oh yeah, and in case you didn't know, on top of being a great actor, Curtis got extra points for being the daughter of Janet Leigh, who was in Psycho, a movie that Carpenter praised for its influence on the horror genre. Since Halloween was inspired by Psycho, it only felt right that Curtis played the main lead, even though she felt like her personality was more in tune with the other characters. Being the daughter of a famous actress, you would have expected Curtis to have started acting as a young child, but her mother didn't want to force her and wanted her to just enjoy being a kid without the worries of having an acting gig. Curtis's mother even got a call from Agent Ray Stark asking Curtis to audition for Regan in The Exorcist, but her mom declined, something Curtis has gone on to appreciate since she also feels that kids should never be forced to act unless they're desperately passionate to do it. Regardless, Curtis didn't start her acting career until she was 19. Curtis's agent told her that Carpenter was a young and hip filmmaker with a cult following from Assault on Precinct 13, so they suggested she audition for Halloween. She was also attracted to the role because she saw Laurie's name on every page. At this point in her career, she was so used to seeing her name once or twice in a script that she got excited when she saw Laurie was the leading role. In total, Curtis auditioned for Laurie 3 times, and after she got cast, she went to JCPenney with the costume designer to pick up the most back-to-school type clothes they could find. So far, the film's cast were all small actors. Carpenter and executives wanted to try and bring in a big-name actor to play the role of Dr. Sam Loomis. Carpenter and Hill reached out to Yablans to tell them they were ready to offer the role to Christopher Lee, which Yablans felt a little worried about since he didn't want to make another Hammer film. Yablans sent the offer, however Lee declined. Up next was Peter Cushing, but he also declined the role. One day Yablans was watching Will Penny and thought of asking Donald Pleasence. He suggested him to Carpenter, and because they both thought he would be a great Sam Loomis, they offered him the role. To everyone's surprise, Pleasence accepted the role but asked for $25,000, which was not in the budget. Originally, they only had $10,000 set aside for a big-name actor. Thankfully, Yablans was able to get the extra money, and so Pleasence was hired to do the film for only 5 days. Because he was the big actor, they would drive him to and from the set, and even have a trailer for him to make the film feel bigger than it actually was. Before completely accepting the role, Pleasence had lunch with John Carpenter. In this meeting, Pleasence told Carpenter that he didn't get the movie, he didn't understand the role, nor did he like it, but he decided to do it because his daughter was a fan of Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. Then Pleasence asked Carpenter to explain to him why he should continue and do the film. Keep in mind, Carpenter grew up watching this guy's movies, so I can't even imagine how scared he must have felt. In more recent interviews, Carpenter said that he became friends with Pleasence and found out he didn't do that to scare him, but because he wanted to see how passionate he was about the film. While the main characters were being cast, Carpenter and Hill assembled the production crew. Debra Hill had worked with cinematographer Dean Cundey on B-movies like Satan's Cheerleaders and Bare Knuckles, so she asked him to DP Halloween. Cundey went on to be a massive cinematographer and later filmed other Carpenter films like The Fog, The Thing, and Escape from New York. He also worked on some of the most important films in history like Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, Apollo 13, and Jack and Jill. For production designer and editor, Carpenter hired his childhood friend Tommy Lee Wallace, who went on to direct Halloween 3, Fright Night 2, and the It TV miniseries. In the script, Carpenter wrote for the shape to have a mask with human features. He was inspired to write this after watching the 1960 French film Eyes Without a Face, a movie that creeped him out due to the immobile faces. When asked to create the mask for Michael Myers, Wallace went to the store and brought back a few options for the mask. He had masks of Richard Nixon, Spock, Emmett Kelly, and finally a Captain Kirk mask. They tried them all on and found the clown one to be unsettling. But after seeing the Captain Kirk mask on, Wallace said the room froze and sent chills down everyone's spine. To make the mask creepier, they removed the eyebrows and sideburns, made the eye holes bigger, and spray painted it pale white. Yablans felt the mask wasn't scary and was too phony, but Carpenter had full creative control, so they kept it in, something Yablans was later thankful for. Principal photography was now scheduled over the course of 4 weeks, with a total of 20 production days. As they started gearing up, Carpenter's UCLA schoolmate Nick Castle found out they were filming near his house and asked if he could hang out during production. Carpenter didn't mind having him, but wanted him to do something while he was on set. So Carpenter told him he would play Michael Myers in the majority of the shots, paying him $25 a day. For example, here you see Castle jumping onto the vehicle, which according to him wasn't as fun as it sounds.
Early on, when the Michael Myers escapes from the hospital, he jumps on a car, right, and he smashes the car window. It was raining that night. It was supposed to be raining that night, and it was very cold that night, and all I had on was my underwear and this hospital gown, and I didn't know it was supposed to rain. This is 3 in the morning, maybe 40-something degrees, and all of a sudden, someone yells, Dean Cundey, that little rat, probably yelled, "Turn on the hoses." And they turned on the hoses. They didn't bother to warm up the water or anything like that. And I remember the feeling of ice-cold water hitting my body through the hospital gown. And then they had to do take after take. And I'm sure there was no film on the camera. I'm sure the first take was perfect, and they were just doing it to torture me.
Having a very low budget, Carpenter wanted to make the film feel a lot more expensive than it actually was, so there were 3 things he decided to focus the money towards. First being the Panavision lenses to get the anamorphic look, second was having the film processed at MGM, and finally, it was getting post-production done at Goldwing Sound, which was one of the best post-production houses at the time. Just goes to show how important sound really is.
Come on now.
They also rented the new Panaglide, which was reportedly used in The Exorcist. Carpenter used the Panaglide to create a sense of dread and to help move the crew faster by having fewer shots they needed to get. This proved to be a big part of the film's final look since the movie has multiple long shots with it. Speaking of long shots, production for Halloween started in May of 1978 on the streets of West Hollywood and South Pasadena, even though the film takes place in New Jersey. For the first day of filming, they shot all the scenes with the teenage girls walking, seeing Michael drive up in the car, and in fact, the very first shot they filmed was when Laurie meets up with Tommy Doyle and lets the audience know she's babysitting him. For the last shot of the day, they filmed this part where Laurie is singing and we see Michael's shoulder come in frame. Curtis asked Carpenter what she should sing, but Carpenter just told her to make something up.
And I remember the last thing we shot that day was me walking down the street away from Tommy Doyle, singing the little song. And I remember saying to John, very clearly I remember saying, "So what do you want me to sing?" And he said, "Well, just, make up a song." I said, "Because I don't sing. Really don't sing." And he said, "Well, it doesn't matter. It's like an internal monologue. She's not belting a, country western tune." And I remember going, "Oh, okay." And really just making it up on the spot.
After wrapping up that first day, Jamie Lee Curtis went back home feeling like she did an awful job on the film. Her roommate went up to her and told her that John Carpenter was on the phone wishing to speak with her. At this point, she was sure she was going to be fired, but Carpenter was simply calling to let her know how marvelous of a job she did. Curtis has said in interviews that was one of the nicest things any director has ever done for her.
Man, I don't see why he doesn't like crunchy peanut butter. No? No, I don't want that. Wait, one more question. Crunchy or smooth?
Well, it looks like Dozer's a no-show. My popcorn is stale, so let's just go ahead and watch this film together because I'm not about to let this one-night rental go to waste. The movie starts off with one of the best opening titles ever to a horror film. That jack-o'-lantern was cut by production designer Tommy Lee Wallace and was even filmed in the same garage where they shot the driving scenes with Donald Pleasence and Nancy Stevens. And no, they weren't actually driving. In many films, they simply put a black backdrop behind the actor, swing lights, and shake the car. Then they mix it up with shots of the road and it looks like the characters are driving. Movie magic at its finest. After a great credit sequence, we're introduced to the Myers house in this long one take, also known as a tracking shot or a oneer. Carpenter was inspired to do this shot after watching the Orson Welles film Touch of Evil. Orson Welles was known for using dolly shots, which is something Carpenter wanted to use but didn't have the money to do it, so they compromised and got the Panaglide. They ended up shooting this on the absolute last day of production, one of the reasons being that they needed to make this dirty, torn down house look 15 years younger. So while Carpenter and his DP Dean Cundy mapped out where the camera and lighting would go, everyone else, including Jamie Lee Curtis, started whitewashing the house, adding new curtains, and moving in furniture to make the house look more lived in. Because of many limitations, they planned out areas where they could make seamless cuts, which ended up being when Michael puts the mask on and the whip pan after Michael kills his sister. Because they shot this with the Panaglide, it made it possible for them to get these long, smooth shots. However, because they were using the Panavision anamorphic lenses, they couldn't focus on objects too close to the camera, which is why when you see Michael grab the knife, it dips out of focus. Carpenter was aware and purposely asked Debra Hill, who played Michael in this POV shot for budgetary and timing reasons, to do the action quickly so it's not that noticeable. Because of the difficulties of doing a long take, multiple crew members had to quickly set up lights or take them out before the camera saw it. According to Curtis, who was sitting outside while they got the shot, it was like watching a choreographed dance. After a 6-year-old Michael stabs his sister to death and is caught by his parents, we cut to 15 years later with Dr. Sam Loomis and Nurse Marion Chambers arriving at the sanitarium to escort Michael to court. Marion Chambers is played by Nancy Stevens, who went on to marry the director of Halloween 2, Rick Rosenthal. When they arrive, they find many patients wandering outside, so Loomis goes out to find Michael. That's when our inciting incident happens 10 minutes into the film, and we see Michael Myers steal the car and drive off. Somehow. We're then introduced to the ordinary world that our main character, Laurie Strode, lives in. Like I mentioned earlier, this was all shot on the very first day of production, and that's Laurie's dad getting into John Carpenter's car at the time. Our call to adventure is set up when Tommy Doyle meets up with Laurie and lets the audience know that Laurie is going to babysit him that night. The following scene has Loomis talking with Dr. Terrence Wynn, administrator of Smith's Grove Sanitarium, as Loomis gets in his car due to his suspicions that Michael's heading back to his hometown. While Laurie is in class, she looks outside the window and sees the shape for the first time. What I always found creepy is how wide of an angle this is. Because it's so wide, we don't really get a good look at Michael. We can somewhat see that he's wearing a mask, but it's very unclear, so then the imagination takes over. The same actually applies with most of the shots of Michael. It isn't until the final act when we get a close look at his face. After Laurie's spooky sighting, we see Tommy Doyle getting picked on by some bullies.
The boogeyman is coming!
That bully, named Richie, is actually played by producer Irwin Yablans' son. Because it was the springtime, it was actually very difficult for the crew to find pumpkins, which is why you only see a handful of them throughout the film. This was one of the only ones they had, and it took multiple attempts to break it, to the point where the crew had to slice it a bit for it to smash open when Tommy Doyle fell on it. In the next scene, we're properly introduced to our B-plot. We see Loomis calling the Haddonfield police and warning them about Michael. Later, we see a dead mechanic with his clothes stripped off. Okay, Michael. You could argue that the B-plot should have started when Loomis got in his car, but this feels more right since this is the first time we see him actually trying to trace Michael down. This is also the scene that wraps up Act 1. At this point, we pretty much know everything we need to know, plot-wise. Michael is bad, Loomis is chasing, and the innocent Laurie is being stalked. Speaking of stalking, Act 2 starts with Laurie walking home with her totally fabulous friends. They see a slow driving car, and we get one of the most famous lines from the film.
Hey, jerk! Speed kills!
When Laurie and Annie are walking home, Laurie spots Michael literally right in front of her. This guy isn't discreet at all. Carpenter and Hill purposely made Laurie's friends very oblivious to their surroundings, while Laurie was always very observant. Oh, look, there's John Carpenter's puff of smoke. We then get a scare scene with Sheriff Brackett where you actually see Curtis laughing, which is why she covers her mouth. While Laurie is changing into her final attire, she spots the shape right outside the window. This scene must have come naturally to Curtis since it was the scene that she kept auditioning with. Oh, and look at that. There's a Raggedy Ann doll in the background, which is the same type of doll as the real cursed Annabelle doll that is most commonly known for the Conjuring films. Ed and Lorraine Warren were given the doll sometime in the 70s, so who knows if Carpenter or someone in the crew put that in there because of that. Honestly, I kinda doubt it, but you never know. The next scene has Laurie walking down the street with Tommy Doyle's pumpkin when she sees some trick-or-treaters in their costume. All the leaves you see flying in the air were each hand-painted orange and blown with a fan to give the illusion that it was fall. So after each take, everyone had to pick up the leaves and film it again. They had 3 bags full of painted leaves, but didn't have enough, which is why there aren't any leaves in the background. After Loomis finds out Judy's headstone is missing from the cemetery, we see Laurie and Annie listening to Don't Fear the Reaper, an omen for what's to come. They stop at the hardware store where Annie's dad, aka Sheriff Brackett, says someone stole Halloween masks, rope, and knives. Not suspicious at all, Michael. As Laurie and Annie leave, Loomis meets Sheriff Brackett as we see Michael following Annie's car in the background. This next scene with Annie and Laurie in the car was added since Carpenter needed to hit his 90-minute runtime and because he felt they needed a good transition from day to night. That's why they shot this during twilight hour. Did this scene slow down the pacing? Yeah, it did, but that was Carpenter's intent. He said in interviews that modern audiences want everything fast-paced, but a slow pace was more important to this film to build up dread.
Modern audiences are used to fast cutting.
Let's go.
Information that lasts just a minute, a second on the screen.
Yeah.
To further make the transition work, during post-production, they slowly started to make the shot darker, then slam cut to night and get this great shot of Michael watching over Laurie. The shot is followed up with Loomis and Brackett at the Myers house, which, by the way, this is actually how the house looked like during production. It was a complete ruin and was due to be demolished in the 80s, but because of the high success of Halloween, it was purchased for $1 and physically moved. It now sits at the end of the same street opposite from where the location of the hardware store was. Loomis delivers his amazing pure evil speech, and we cut back to Tommy Doyle's house where he asks Laurie about the boogeyman.
Laurie, what's the boogeyman?
Laurie says he doesn't exist, but Tommy thinks otherwise when he sees the shaped silhouette outside the window. Meanwhile, Michael is stalking Annie but is bothered by the barking dog. Unfortunately, that wasn't a great idea for poor old Lester because Michael quiets him down the best way he knows how. They accomplished this effect by having Nick Castle carry the dog as they filmed it in slow motion. This made it look like the dog's legs went limp. In the next scene, we have the Thing from Another World playing on TV before Laurie has to reassure Tommy by telling him there's no boogeyman.
What about the boogeyman?
There's no such thing.
Like I mentioned earlier, Carpenter's filmmaking idol was Howard Hawks, who had created movies of all different genres. He was responsible for the first film adaptation of Who Goes There by John W. Campbell called The Thing from Another World, one of Carpenter's favorite movies growing up, so much so that he directed an outstanding remake that came out 4 years later. The following scene is basically build up to Annie's death, but Carpenter knows better than to release tension this early, so after she gets unstuck from the window, we get Carpenter's favorite shot in the film where she drops off Lindsay at Tommy Doyle's house so she can go pick up her boyfriend, all in one continuous take. Another fun fact, Lindsay is played by Kyle Richards, who is most commonly known for being in The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Yeah, I bet you didn't see that coming. Once Annie goes back home, we get a prolonged scene with Annie getting ready, going to the car, forgetting her keys, fixing her hair, and finally getting killed by Michael. Carpenter wanted to really play with the audience because by having her take so long, it almost makes the audience forget the fact that she never unlocked the car door herself, even though she was initially locked out. After Annie's demise, Tommy happens to see Michael moving the body inside the house and freaks out. We then see Loomis waiting outside the Myers house in this hilarious scene where he scares off the bullies.
Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
Back to the A-plot, Linda arrives at Lindsay's house with her totally amazing boyfriend. After finding out they're home alone, they go upstairs and get it on like Donkey Kong. Wait, act ill. Bob goes down to get some post-sex beers, but is surprised when he sees Michael come out of the closet. After hanging him up like a picture frame, we finally get the iconic head tilt where Michael admires his work, a direction that Carpenter gave to Nick Castle. At this point in the story marks where the bad guys start to close in. Annie was a warm-up, and now with Bob, Michael is going full force. Back upstairs, Linda teases a spooky-looking Michael, as if he wasn't already scary enough. Michael ends up choking Linda to death with the phone cord, and after an hour, 8 minutes, and 15 seconds, we get a clear shot of Michael's mask. This wraps up the second act and prepares us for the intense climax that's coming up. Now, I already told the story on how Michael got his mask, but I bet most of you don't know where his name came from. Carpenter named him after the distributor of Assault on Precinct 13, Michael Myers, who worked at Miracle Films. Myers pushed the film into the London International Film Festival, where Carpenter got his career started, so, as a tribute, he named a soulless killer after him. Back to the film, we follow up Linda's death with Loomis finding the car Michael stole. Meanwhile, after making a few failed calls, Laurie decides to check up on her friends. It's this very long shot where audiences would yell at Laurie not to go in the house, proof to the filmmakers that they had made the slow pace work. Once inside the house, Laurie finds her dead friends. It's at this point in the story where she reaches her ordeal, since it's her lowest point thus far. And in my personal favorite shot, Michael is revealed to be right behind Laurie. The idea behind this shot is that Carpenter wanted the audience to feel like their eyes were adjusting to the dark. Therefore, more things would become visible. Cinematographer Dean Cundy angled a light towards Michael's face and slowly dimmed it up to reveal him. After falling down the stairs, Laurie gets a lucky head start. She breaks through some sugar glass and starts running back to Tommy Doyle's house in this highly suspenseful scene. For one of the shots where Michael is walking across the street, Nick Castle asked the classic actor question, which is when Carpenter had the greatest direction he's probably ever given in his entire career.
So I came up to him and basically asked him, what's my motivation? You know, as the shape walking across. How do you want me to walk? You know, how do you want me to, am I supposed to be this or that? And he said, Nick, just walk.
During pre-production, Carpenter knew they were going to be filming out of order, so Curtis and him went through the script and numbered the level of intensity that Laurie should be feeling, with 1 being calm, 2 being oblivious, 3 was on the fence, and 4 being over the top. I'm sure at this point there was the number 4 written all over these last few pages. After Tommy lets Laurie in, she gathers her team and tells Tommy and Lindsay to lock themselves in the closet upstairs. Unfortunately for Laurie, Michael knows how to open doors, so he attacks her only to have Laurie stab him in the neck, executing her first plan. After dropping the knife and assuming Michael is dead, Laurie checks on the kids upstairs. Unfortunately, Laurie's in for a high tower surprise when Tommy tells her exactly what we're all thinking.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
With the kids back in the closet, Laurie digs deep down and tries to trick Michael by opening the porch doors and then hiding in the bedroom. Lucky for Michael, he's not an idiot and quickly starts to break into the closet. Thankfully, our smart aleck Laurie Strode is resourceful and stabs Michael with a wire hanger. Once again, she thinks he's dead and tells the kids to go run to the neighbor's house and get help. With Loomis prowling the streets, he sees the frantic kids and runs inside Tommy's house. This executes Laurie's new plan as help is on the way. Meanwhile, while Laurie is taking a breather, Michael sits up like Frankenstein's monster and starts to strangle Laurie. Great thing Laurie's a fighter and is able to unmask Michael. For this shot, Nick Castle didn't play Michael because Carpenter wanted someone more angelic and young looking to communicate that this unstoppable force of evil looks like a normal young dude. They cast Tony Moran for this one shot after having a very brief meeting with him. Loomis shoots Michael 6 times until he falls off the porch. Now, knowing how cheap the filmmakers had to be, I'm happy they were able to get the stuntman Jim Winburn to do Michael's fall. In fact, even though Nick Castle is credited and played the shape in most shots, multiple people played him. Production designer Tommy Lee Wallace played a good chunk of him in this final act. Since Wallace was the one who prepared the set, he knew how to make the props break with less takes. In the documentary Halloween 25 Years of Terror, Jim Winburn says that Debra Hill and even John Carpenter himself played a Michael.
Everybody played Michael Myers, basically. Even John Carpenter was, even Debra Hill did one little scene.
I can't confirm for either, but in this same documentary, Debra Hill says she tried to play Michael for some second unit shots, but because of her height, it looked like Michael shrunk. So I'm not quite sure if she ever ended up on the final cut. Regardless, Michael is seemingly shot to death by Loomis. Laurie gives us her final line as a payoff to her telling Tommy the boogeyman isn't real, and in easily one of the greatest endings to a horror film, Loomis checks to see Michael's body only to find it's gone. I've seen this film so many times, and every time it cuts to that empty backyard and the main theme starts playing, I get chills. I saw this for the first time as a kid, and it blew my mind that the movie ended with him escaping. To me, it's so effective because of how quiet it gets once Michael falls down. There's finally a sense of relief for everyone, the scene quiets down, we hear the sound of crickets, then bam. He's gone, and the music comes in at full blast as a reminder that the boogeyman never dies. Another aspect I love is Loomis's expression. In fact, while shooting this scene, Donald Pleasence asked Carpenter how he wanted him to act, so he gave him 2 reactions, an "oh my god" or "I knew this would happen." Carpenter wasn't sure, so he asked him to do both. Carpenter said that Donald knew which was the good one, but he still asked what he wanted regardless of what he thought, and that was Carpenter's sign that he was working with a pro. And with this ending, Laurie Strode enters a new world in which she will never be the same again. Before I wrap this up and let you all know the post-Halloween history, let's take a quick look at our story wheel. As you can see, the act breaks are looking pretty symmetrical, so that's nice. I was able to find quite a few setups and payoffs that you might have not thought about before. The first one is for the Red Lounge matches. Here's where you see them in the car with Loomis and Nurse Chambers, and this is where Loomis finds the matches, letting him know Michael was there. Oh, and we get to see Michael's weird way of getting new clothes. The second one is basically all the times that Michael and Dr. Loomis were in the same scene together. They're first together in the opening when the evil escapes, then we see them again when Michael drives right past Loomis, and finally we see them together in their final confrontation. Here's a small one. This is when the bullies are messing with Tommy Doyle and warning him about the boogeyman, and this is where they dare each other to go into the boogeyman's old home before Loomis scares them off. Another small one, this is when Judith Myers is killed. This is when her tombstone is found to be stolen, and this is when we find out what Michael did with the tombstone. Speaking of Judith Myers, let's see how the Michael Myers we all know is revealed. This is when he escapes. This is where we see he stole a mechanic's clothes. This is when we find out the masks and knives were stolen from the hardware store. This is where he does his famous head tilt. And finally, this is the first time he's revealed in an up-close angle and officially joining with the rest of the iconic horror slashers. For this next one, this sets up Linda's death. Here is when Annie calls Lori but doesn't talk because she's chewing, which ends up freaking Lori out, and this is where Lori answers the phone and thinks Annie is messing with her again, when in reality, Linda is totally getting killed. Now for my favorite one. When is the boogeyman mentioned? Well, here's when the bullies put that idea in Tommy Doyle's head.
The boogeyman is coming.
This is when Tommy asks Lori if the boogeyman is real.
Lori, what's the boogeyman?
This is when Lori tells Tommy that the boogeyman can only come out on Halloween night.
The boogeyman can only come out on Halloween night, right?
Right.
Well, I'm here tonight. I'm not about to let anything happen to you.
This is when Tommy tells Lori the boogeyman can't die before getting jump scared.
How? I killed him.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
And this is when Lori tells Loomis,
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Finally, for this movie, we start and end with a shot of the Myers house as a reminder of what happened on Halloween night 1963 and Halloween night 1978. Overall, this movie had a lot for me to find, but I'm sure I didn't find everything, so let me know in the comments if there's any other setups and payoffs to catch and learn from them. But that wraps up the classic Halloween. Carpenter wanted to replicate that feeling of going into a haunted house at your local carnival. The tension of not knowing when something would happen, then having it suddenly happen, was the most important factor in making this work. He's said in interviews that he didn't set out to make a gory film, he set out to make a scary film that creates the same dread and suspense you get when you twist a jack-in-the-box. In the summer of 1978, Carpenter was trying to get more directing jobs, so he showed film executives this movie. They were very unimpressed and told him that movies like that didn't scare them at all. That definitely must have hurt Carpenter, but at that time, the film's score hadn't been added. Carpenter decided to do the music himself since he was fast and cheap. So fast actually that he scored the entire film in only 3 days. 6 months later, when Carpenter screened the film to those same executives, they said it was one of the scariest films they had ever seen. A true testament to how important sound is to your films, and in some ways, even more than the visuals. After the film was finished, Irwin Yablans and his partner Joseph Wolf struggled getting Halloween in theaters. They had two choices: either they distribute themselves or they convince a major studio to distribute the film. Yablans invited major studios like Warner Brothers, Paramount, etc. to watch a screening of the movie, but no one came. Having only one other choice, they decided to distribute the film themselves, so Wolf called MGM, and since he had just done him a favor, he asked for a favor in return and was able to get 400 prints of the movie. They booked theaters city by city across the United States, but the film bombed terribly, making only around $300 a week. Since Carpenter was an alumni, many of the filmmakers had a screening of the film at UCLA. According to Dean Cundy, it wasn't received that well, with a good third of the class walking out of the movie, and the ones who stayed to finish asked the filmmakers why they would make a disgusting film. The college students weren't even the only ones who hated it. Many film critics trashed the movie, calling it garbage. Even Tony Moran, who played the unmasked Michael, threw away his invitation to the movie premiere because he saw it as a horror movie with a guy wearing a mask that was getting destroyed by critics. At this point, Carpenter and Hill felt like that was pretty much the end of the movie's life. Carpenter even moved on and directed a later frequent collaborator, Kurt Russell, in the TV movie Elvis. Jamie Lee Curtis took the $8,000 she was paid to do Halloween and went back to doing small roles in a Love Boat episode she did with her mother and a Charlie's Angels episode. PJ Soles went on to do Rock and Roll High School with Dean Cundy, also acting as the director of photography. But then, the film was screened at the Chicago Film Festival, and popular film critics Tom Allen and Roger Ebert gave the film amazing reviews. Slowly, the numbers started to double until one point when audiences would be lined up outside the theater waiting to watch the film. Shot in 20 days with a final budget of $320,000, Halloween went on to gross over $50 million nationwide and had become one of the most profitable independent films for the time. On top of the $10,000 that Carpenter received, he was also promised 10% of the film's profits, which means by the end of it, Carpenter received an extra $5 million. Not bad. By now, studios that had initially turned down Halloween had started imitating it, leading to the big bang for the slasher genre. NBC bought the film and gave Carpenter the budget to go back and shoot some extra scenes to show on TV.
It's Halloween, the night he came home.
The film became so big that later on, John Carpenter and Debra Hill attended a party where they met Christopher Lee in person, and Lee expressed that declining that role was the biggest mistake he had ever made. At this point, you would think that Jamie Lee Curtis would start getting offers left and right for roles, but you'd be wrong. Other than the previously mentioned shows she did, Curtis wasn't cast in anything. It wasn't until Carpenter cast her in The Fog that her acting career really took off. She became America's Scream Queen, landing roles in Prom Night and Terror Train. After Halloween 2, she left the horror genre because it would be harder for her to get other roles later on. Also, to my surprise, she's said in multiple interviews that she doesn't like horror movies.
I don't understand why you won't go to see a modern horror
I don't
film.
like to be frightened, John, at all. At all. There's nothing I find interesting, provocative, titillating about being frightened. It just doesn't hold me in thrall at all.
Curtis went on to do a voiceover for a documentary John Landis was making on monster movies called Coming Soon. Landis then cast her in Trading Places, and from there, she became the big star we all know today. Curtis has gone on to say nothing but positive things about the first Halloween, even calling it the single greatest experience of her life because of how guerrilla and young everyone was. Most of the crew worked for free, and many of the actors were underpaid. However, in a way, that proved to be a good thing because everyone on set wanted to be there. Carpenter has agreed with Curtis and has said that it was a fun experience and the last time he can remember not feeling stressed during a film, simply because he had nothing to lose if Halloween failed. One of the cameramen even gave Jamie Lee Curtis the slate after they wrapped shooting, which she took to one of her only convention appearances. The film has made a giant impact on not only film history, but with the fans it created, even saving a man's life, as Curtis found out at a panel for the 2018 Halloween. Which, by the way, Carpenter has been hilariously open about the fact that he doesn't care about any of the sequels as long as he gets his check.
To be remade, to have a movie of mine remade is very flattering. And some of these remakes I get to collect a check, which is even nicer.
In 2006, Halloween went on to be selected for the preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. Because of this small little film, many horror tropes were created, like the undying villain, the lustful teens dying, the jump scares, and having the final girl be the virgin or smart aleck, which was something Carpenter didn't even intend to do. He wasn't thinking too deep about the fact that the only girl that survived was the one without a boyfriend.
People have criticized me more than you, that saying about this film that the virginal girl is the one who survives, and all the girls who are sexually active get punished.
Yes.
And they felt that I was being a retro
feminist. And was that your intent?
No.
No, thank you. I didn't think it was your intent.
So yeah, watching the film today, it's very easy to find mistakes and flaws with the film, but it doesn't change the fact that it was this original shape that brought life to many of the horror icons waiting to be created in the following decades. A true classic never goes out of style. Dozer? 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 Crunchy. Dozer loves crunchy. Wait, you killed Dozer? I fantasized of doing the same. I think we can work something out here. I guess Crunchy really is the better one. Okay, well, I should probably go rewind those tapes.